Gold prices have really been caught in a tug of war between inflation and deflation. Which one wins out in 2012?
In terms of headline inflation, so if you look at CPI inflation, I suspect we're not going to see a huge amount of inflation coming through. When unemployment is as high as it is in the United States, and in particular in countries like Spain and in Italy, and of course in Greece, where labor markets are not very tight and overall constraints on economies are very minimal, I think the likelihood of this increase in money supply actually feeding through to headline prices is quite unlikely in the near term. And I actually would argue that deflationary risks are probably more of a concern in a slowing growth environment than inflationary concerns. And that's why I think central banks are going to continue to maintain extremely easy monetary policy, and why it's probably very likely, unless we are lucky and see a big turnaround in U.S. growth, that we'll probably see a QE3 come through from the U.S. Fed as well.
So what happens to gold in a deflationary environment, even if we see central banks trying to pump more money into the system to fight it?
I think the key point on markets and how gold price moves is an anticipation. So if investors believe that the Fed is going to add more funds into the system, in other words, increase the supply of US dollars in the system, and there's not an equal amount of new demand for dollars, then the purchasing value of the dollar is going to weaken. And I think that the focus on that is probably the most important driver of the gold price. And in a deflationary environment, often you see problems with financial institutions. You usually see government fiscal accounts and debt levels deteriorating. And the combination of these factors often leads investors to move towards hard assets, with gold being the first port of call.
In the short term, though, do you think that deflation is going to have a negative impact for gold?
I don't think so, because central banks are so reactive now. If you see even the slightest indication that we're moving towards a deflationary environment, in particular in the US, it's very clear that Bernanke will move and ease. And that is usually positive for gold. So I think that deflationary element actually could be very positive for gold in the near term.